Germany's Stern magazine calls for conscription of young people to take up arms to defend diversity in a pro-war propaganda piece. Yeah, they want to draft young white men to fight and die for a government and country that hates them, all in the name of diversity. Look, if you do this, if you train them and arm them and ship them off to the front lines, you realize they're going to defect to Russia first chance they get, right? I hope you're ready for that. Stern magazine is calling for mass conscription of German youth to join the army, including to ensure the defense of freedom and diversity. Diversity is the only thing they have left in Europe. They have no freedom. Like, they are basically a fascist dictatorship. So, yeah, you're not going to fight for literally Hitler, are you? Now, the reaction to the article has been harsh, to say the least, with hundreds of negative comments directed at Stern. Yeah, why don't the people that wrote the article enlist and go to the front lines? If the article entitled "Others No Longer Defend Us, Then We Must Do It Ourselves," so claims that the USA no longer wants to protect Germany. This brings a bitter realization: our unbearable complacency must end. And they're right. So what is their solution to others no longer wanting to defend them? They find a different group of others and try to force them to defend them. They're not going to do this themselves. None of these faux intellectuals are going to enlist and defend themselves. No, they're going to try to conscript young people to fight and die for them. And the solution: start drafting German youth to fight in future wars. The author, Tilman Gerwein, a German male notes to be well past the age of someone who might typically be drafted, says that the days of dollhouse-like Bouleru are over and we have to grow up. He details the left's traditional stance against conscription, which saw German youth demanding American troops leave Germany, was not only a matter of conscience, but also a lifestyle. He noted that demonstration against NATO, people hopped around in peace-loving suits, chanting "out of NATO into fun." All of this has to end, according to Guerin. There's no way to know if Guerin is even part of those previous protests or ever share those sentiments at one time. But it's notable that he's now old enough not to have to face the draft himself. Lucky him. Yeah, it's easy to advocate in favor of a draft if you yourself are either exempt for physical reasons, or you're too old. Now, all of these people, though, they will refer to you as we. That they will come out and say, we need to do something. We need to fight. We need to stop Putin. We need to fight for democracy. Like, they will always use we. But when it comes time to actually put their money where their mouth is, you're getting drafted. You're getting shipped out. You're gonna fight. It's no longer we. So wouldn't it be funny if the next step will be for all the yous to defect and then come back, say, hey, quote unquote, we better be ready to die for the cause. Who's we? You got a turd in your pocket? He is part of the trend of German establishment left suddenly becoming gung-ho in recent years. They're not willing to fight for themselves, but they will gladly use proxy violence to force you to fight for them. Especially since Putin invaded Ukraine, the old Green Party ideals of removing NATO from Europe and pursuing an anti-war agenda have been jettisoned. Yeah, because that was all just a symptom of not having any real problems. They had it too easy. Now they fucked around and they're finding out. So much of the establishment left has become outright hawkish. With Orange Man now in office, the hawkishness from this German establishment has now gone into overdrive, with the Greens joining forces with the CDU to promote a defense-oriented Germany. And of course, it's going to be everyone else providing that defense, right? Now, will Germans fight for the new Germany? Oh, absolutely not. So the migrants aren't going to fight because they're only there for the free gibs. They're not going to put their lives on the line for that. The white Germans aren't going to fight because why would they fight for someone who hates them and exploits them? No, if you try to make them fight, they're just going to defect. Of course, the new Germany does not exactly have people lining up to fight for it, and that's a real problem for the establishment. Much of the conservative youth no longer see a Germany they would lay down their lives for. And in fact, the new Germany openly despises these AfD voting youths, and maybe even sending them to the front would solve this problem. That's why I think it would be extra funny if their solution was to just defect to Russia. As soon as they show up on the front, they just go, no, we're not going to let you guys kill us off. No, we're going to join Russia, and we're going to come back. We're going to come back home, and we're going to take it back from you. And meanwhile, the left-wing youth is coddled and mostly pacifist. This Spiegel Stern left may like the idea of soldiers going off to fight on their behalf, but they don't actually want to fight to do the fighting themselves. That is pretty much almost every war hawk. They talk mad shit because they know it's not going to be them in the trenches. They're going to send someone else to do it. The old notions of honor and heroes have been so widely mocked and denigrated by the German elite, which Stern acknowledges. Yeah, so after mocking and denigrating them, now they're asking for them. Yeah, we need some heroes. Well, be the hero you want then. So who will fight? Conscript the migrants. Well, in the end, it doesn't have to be a reason for conscription. Youths in Germany, just like Ukraine, will be forced to the front lines of for the likes of Stern's editorial staff when push comes to shove. But it's a nice thought for those journalists that these youths will at least think they have something worth dying for. Yeah, just like Ukraine. I mean, men are going to have to pretty much stay hidden in their homes at all times, or they're going to get abducted and sent off to the front. So what should they die for? Stern addresses this problem. As the very atomized and multicultural society, it reduces the will for Germans to die face down in some trench at the front line. So the magazine writes, take all this into account. During phase of a tremendous challenge, we must dare to embrace more heroism and less hedonism. We need you to make more sacrifices for us while we continue indulging in hedonism. It's okay when we do it. The more communal commitment and less responsibility, avoiding individualism. So they're just outright admitting they're pushing for communism. Nice. At least they're being honest finally. So be careful not to lose sight of what we want to defend, freedom and diversity. If the pendulum swings too far towards individualization, we become defenseless. If the focus is too strong on defense, it goes to the past are awakened. Keyword national community. It's important to find the balance. In what way would you be defending freedom if you're fighting for a totalitarian government that doesn't support freedom? Could anyone explain that to me? How would that be fighting to defend freedom? You have to actually have freedom first in order for it to be defendable. See, Stern doesn't want right-wing people who love their country fighting a patriotic war at the front. This could lead to people voting for the AfD, and then Hitler will come back. That's the logic of Der Spiegel, Stern, and many others. Let's just ignore the fact that Hitler was a fucking national socialist, but instead, they instead want iPhone-wielding hipsters who love diversity dying in the trenches. I'm fine with that. If the soy boys want to go fight for their ideals, go right ahead. I'm not stopping you. These iPhone-wielding youths should be at the front to defend guys like Gawain so he can go back to Vietnamese restaurants, attend book readings from African authors, and enjoy art installations from Brazil and alphabet soup activists. German youth should die for all of the above, not for the German people or the German flag or hearth and home or any other fascist nonsense that typically United Nations led men to lay down their lives for each other and their families. Yeah, that's not happening anymore. They've destroyed everything that would be worth fighting for. And like I mentioned previously, the worst situation that these governments could find themselves in is if their people would prefer the foreign government. Like, actually, our government is kind of, they're a bunch of petty dictators. We'd kind of like it if they were gone. Hey, I'll tell you what, man, we'll team up with you if you get rid of them. Stern also appears relatively sure this youth will indeed be dying as well, saying they will have to take up arms at some point. How about you do it? At the very least, when conscription comes back into effect, the Bundeswehr, will be all of us. Notice they're doing we again. They're doing us again. even if only because our children and grandchildren will take up the arms at some point. Oh, okay. So he's like, oh, no, guys, we're all in this together because like my grandchildren might be conscripted. I'm right there with you guys. What are we prepared to fight for? And when push comes to shove, to die for? The fact that we are being asked to answer this for the first time in decades is the true turning point. And none of these elites are going to like the answer, but they might learn it in their lifetime. However, as Stern writes, German youths are not just fighting for diversity, but also for freedom. Notably, you have a problem with German freedom, such as Germany's harsh free speech laws, when then your freedom should be curtailed with a visit from the police, so as is increasingly the case in Germany. Of course, freedom and democracy are tied together. German youths should be fighting at the front to defend a government increasingly intent on banning the second most popular party in the country, the AfD, which just hit a new polling high this week at 23.5%. But freedom also means banning political party. Freedom also means banning political parties, and we must fight for the right to ban political parties whose opinions we do not agree with, especially if the party is opposed to the Ukraine war, which all of German youth, future soldiers fighting for diversity, should support. It all sounds confusing, but freedom and diversity certainly sound like sound good as long as we don't look at the details. It's also worth noting that despite Germans being called to defend diversity, the cover of Stern is remarkably lacking in diversity. It's two white people, a boy and a girl. No, you don't get it. These are the people that are supposed to die in the name of diversity. That's all part of the plan. So considering Germany's youth are becoming more and more diverse, one would think that it would have been the perfect opportunity to feature a Black or Arab person, or go into any clothing store in Germany or other Western country. The classic motif of the Black male paired with the white female is ubiquitous. However, those on the right often point out when the threat of real wars start, white males suddenly start appearing more and more frequently in recruiting ads for the armed forces. This has been proven true. Holy shit. When there's no real risk of war, we got ads like Emma and her two moms. Once shit's about to hit the fan, it's a bunch of fucking jacked white guys. Laughably, the Stern call to action quotes military historian Sonke Nitzel, who told the magazine in support of conscription, what are we waiting for? That 100% of the population is in favor of it. He claims people won't like it, but it simply has to happen. Yet, then simply make it that everyone who votes in favor of it gets shipped off to the front lines. You willing to do that? No? Then fuck you. Maybe this could at least wait until there's 20% of the population supporting such measures. A new Force poll shows only 70% of Germans are willing to take up arms and die for their country. In short, Stern's vision of an army of conscripts ready to die for Germany sounds a bit like Hitler at the end of the war, who was completely separated from reality and moving armies around the map that did not exist. That's kind of what happens when you're a drug addict that's been having the habit for a little bit too long. Of those 17%, how many of them are older people or whammons who actually would not have to take up arms or be forced to take up arms should the call to war ever come? I'm guessing 103% with a 3% margin of error. As Remix News reported in the past, the Ukrainian army has had something the German army did not, which was the patriotic hardcore right-wing element that was willing to die for Ukraine. Not all of these soldiers were neo-Nazis, but many certainly were. A huge number of these soldiers are already dead, and the war may be coming to an end. Ironically, Ukraine may end up more like Germany in the end with the death of these soldiers, as caused by Ukrainian business leaders to accept the mass importation of migrants to replace the soldiers lost. They're becoming more and more mainstream of a more and more mainstream idea. Yeah. Do you think it'll work though? So as soon as Ukraine advertises that they're basically conscripting migrants now, the migrants are just going to avoid Ukraine. They're going to go around it. The Germans' push for conscription will continue, with hundreds of billions being directed into weapons purchases. The only problem is that Germans are not going to want to fly these fighter jets or drive these tanks. Well, why don't you have the invaders do it then? Train them. Yeah, conscript the illegals and see them run. Oh, if we could direct the running towards Russia. I mean, Russia's already using migrants to try to attack Poland, for example. So as the Twitter comments note, the Germans do not seem especially enthusiastic. One user writes, why should you fight for a country that you can't even be proud of? Or better yet, one that openly hates you. So another response, you failed with your miserable war training and war mentality. Only 70% of Germans want to defend Germany with weapons in hand. According to the latest Forces survey, you won't have my children, you miserable indoctrinators and arms industry lobbyists. Yeah, they got the military industrial complex is everywhere, isn't it? Another asks how old the boy on the cover of the magazine is. Shouldn't the question be, would you give your child? Would you give your child? How old is the boy on the cover? 17. Man, this on the level of Jesus would have been vaccinated. If that was the case, he would have had his death and resurrection before being crucified. Some do not even want people to buy Stern, period. No, don't fight and don't buy the stupid state propaganda magazine either, wrote another. Hey, to be perfectly fair, like no one actually buys these anymore. Like, I bet the only people buying these magazines and papers are people who read them for articles and YouTube content. That's about it.